So Jaws was directed by Steven Spielberg, and it tells the story of Chief Brody as he hunts down a great white shark that is terrorizing the citizens of Amity Island. And the first thing that I have to say is that this will be without a doubt a spoiler review. If you haven't watched Jaws, what are you waiting for? Go watch it. It is amazing. It is one of my favorite films of all time. It is one of the best horror movies I've ever seen. And if I'm being honest, it is one of Steven Spielberg's finest. And by the way, when I say that Jaws is one of Steven Spielberg's finest, that means a lot. After all, Steven Spielberg has directed classics, absolute classics, such as Jurassic Park, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Catch Me If You Can, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and many, many more. Therefore, when I say that Jaws is one of Steven Spielberg's best, that means a lot. Anyway, yesterday I rewatched Jaws and I had the chance of watching it in theaters for the very first time. It was an amazing experience, and as soon as the movie was over, I knew that I needed to talk about it. That said, if I'm being honest, I struggled to come up with what to say, because what can I say about Jaws that hasn't been said so already? Sure, I could talk about John Williams' incredibly iconic score, and how, even though it is very simple and minimalist, it is also one of the most effective in film history. I could talk about Spielberg's use of cinematography and visuals in order to convey the mental state of our characters, or the perilousness of their situations. Or I could even talk about the incredible performances given by Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, and Richard Dreyfuss. That said, there are many videos covering these topics already. Therefore, in order to try to say something new, I will instead talk about how, in Jaws, Steven Spielberg mastered the art of cinematic suspense by using Alfred Hitchcock's bomb theory. So for those of you who don't know, Alfred Hitchcock is one of the most famous directors from the golden age of Hollywood. And in my opinion, he's one of the best directors of all time. He directed masterpieces such as Psycho, Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Dial M for Murder, Rebecca, Rope, and many, many more. That said, for many people, he is just known as the master of suspense. And the reason why Hitchcock is referred to as the master of suspense is because he knew exactly how to evoke this feeling from his audience. And that is something that can be clearly seen in his iconic bomb theory. So the bomb theory is a rhetorical experiment that Hitchcock uses in order to illustrate the difference in between shock and suspense. As part of this rhetorical experiment, Hitchcock presents two different scenarios. In scenario number 1, there are 4 people sitting around a table talking about baseball. Then suddenly, after 5 minutes of talking, a bomb explodes. If audiences were to see the scenario on the big screen, they would experience 10 seconds of shock right after the bomb explodes. Now, scenario number 2 is pretty much the same. You have the same 4 people sitting around a table talking about baseball, and just like in scenario number 1, after 5 minutes of talking, the bomb explodes. That said, what makes the scenario different is that before the conversation even begins, the audience is told that there is a bomb underneath the table that will go off in 5 minutes. Now, if audiences were to see the scenario on the big screen, instead of just simply experiencing 10 seconds of shock, they would feel 5 whole minutes of suspense. So basically, if I were to narrow down Hitchcock's bomb theory into its essence, I would say that this theory teaches us that in order for there to be suspense, the audience always needs to know more than the characters on screen. And this fundamental can be found throughout Hitchcock's entire body of work. In Psycho's iconic shower scene, viewers are made aware of the killer's presence way before the protagonist even notices him. In The Birds, we see the crows gathering outside the school before the protagonist even realizes that they're in danger. And in Rope, the entire movie is filled with suspense because while the characters are enjoying a dinner party, we, the viewers, know that there's a dead body hidden in the room. And this fundamental, the idea that viewers need to know more than the characters on screen in order for there to be suspense, is one that Steven Spielberg understands to perfection. And he makes that very clear all throughout Jaws. After all, most shark attack scenes in this film are great examples of Hitchcockian suspense. In these scenes, viewers usually know more than the characters on screen. We are aware of the shark's presence way before the characters even realize that they're in danger. And that is something that Steven Spielberg achieved by using John Williams' amazing music and extremely effective POV shots in order to announce the shark's presence. 90% of the times before the shark even attacks, we hear that iconic ba-dum, 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 and on top of that, we are allowed to see the world from the shark's perspective. we know more than the characters on screen, and therefore, we feel suspense. Now, considering that I'm talking about Jaws and Hitchcock's bomb theory, I have to mention the iconic get out of the water scene. In this scene, a bunch of children are playing in the water until the shark attacks a kid who is having fun with an inflatable. And the reason why I have to single out this scene is because in this scene, there are two people who are simultaneously experiencing the effects of Hitchcock's bomb theory. The viewer and Chief Brody. Before the children even realize that they're in danger, the viewer is aware of the shark's presence thanks to John Williams' score and the iconic POV shots, and Chief Brody is aware of the shark's presence because he's pretty much the only person on the beach who knows about Chrissy Watkins' death. So yeah, it is fair to say that in Jaws, Steven Spielberg uses Hitchcock's bomb theory to perfection in order to evoke suspense from his viewers. Now, even though the suspense in this film is truly fantastic, there is something else that I have to highlight, and that is Steven Spielberg's unparalleled ingenuity. For those of you who don't know, initially Spielberg wanted to feature the shark a lot more throughout the film. In fact, the shark was going to be visible from very early on in the movie. That said, as soon as they began production, the shark animatronics malfunctioned when exposed to the salt water and quickly became unusable. And at this moment, instead of giving up and walking away, Steven Spielberg used his ingenuity to come up with a way to make a movie full of shark attacks without actually having a shark. These obstacles and limitations forced Steven Spielberg to think outside the box and inspired him to come up with what would become some of the most iconic elements of this film. Now that they didn't have a shark animatronic, the camera and the music would need to be the shark. Of course, they eventually got some of the shark animatronics to work, but they used them sparingly, mostly in the third act. And I love this story because it shows that limitations are not always a bad thing. You know, people have this idea that limitations are detrimental and always hinder an artist's creativity, but that is just simply not the case. Yes, limitations can sometimes impede people from doing certain things, but the best artists rise to the occasion and see these limitations as challenges. Challenges inviting them to come up with ingenious ways to make their visions a reality despite these limitations. And Steven Spielberg is a great example of one of these artists. If it wasn't for the fact that the shark animatronic malfunctioned, maybe Jaws wouldn't have been as great as it is. After all, if Spielberg wouldn't have faced these obstacles, he wouldn't have had the need to come up with things such as shark POV shots or music that could be used to inform viewers about the shark's presence without there actually even being a shark on screen. On top of that, the limitations that Spielberg faced might have been a good thing because they forced him to understand the fundamental principle of horror cinema, that viewers are always more scared about what they can't see than about what they can. If the shark animatronics would have never malfunctioned, Spielberg would have probably used them very heavily throughout the film. Audiences would have probably gotten a good look of the shark from very early on in the movie, and the fear would have probably disappeared by the beginning of the third act. After all, seeing something, understanding something, that is what makes our fear disappear. We are afraid of what we can't see or understand, and the limitations that Spielberg faced while making Jaws allowed him to realize that. After all, these limitations forced him to keep the shark hidden until the very, very end. So yeah, thanks to the limitations that he faced while making Jaws, Spielberg was able to show us that the scariest shark is not the one that can be photographed or filmed, but the one that lives exclusively in the viewer's mind. So in conclusion, Jaws is an absolute masterpiece. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. It is one of Steven Spielberg's very best. And honestly, it goes up there in the pantheon of what I consider to be the greatest horror movies ever made, along with films such as Psycho, The Exorcist, Alien, The Shining, The Thing, The Silence of the Lambs, Perfect Blue, The Sixth Sense, and Hereditary. If I were to give Jaws a score in between 1 to 10, I would definitely, without the shadow of a doubt, give it a 10 out of 10, because this film is an absolute masterpiece. Now, before I end this video, I would just like to thank you all for 100 subscribers. I genuinely have no words. This is a lot more than I could have ever expected, and all I can say is thank you. Thank you so much for watching. That said, I hope you'll know that we're just getting started, and there are some very exciting things coming to Take Juan real soon. For instance, we are very happy to announce that this year we will be covering the Vancouver International Film Festival as members of the press. On top of that, Take Juan will be partnering with the festival, and who knows, we might be doing some giveaways in the near future. So yeah, keep an eye out on that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.